This is the LG G7 and this is the Moto G7. Both have similar designs with larger chins, notches, fingerprint scanners, as well as USB Type-C ports and headphone jacks. Both also have glass on the back with curved sides, although the Moto G7's sides are a little bit more curved than the LG's. The Moto G7 is also larger with a 6.2-inch display compared to 6.1 inches. They both have differently shaped notches. I personally prefer the one on the LG since it is not as deep, although some may prefer the one on the Moto G7. The camera for the LG G7 is flush with the back of the phone, while the Moto G7 has a protruding camera bump, which may cause it to wobble a little when tapping the display, which the LG G7 shouldn't do. The LG also comes with some features that the Motorola phone doesn't, such as a dedicated Google Assistant button, which you can press to talk to Google Assistant. If you hold it, then Google Assistant will only listen while you're holding the button, and if you double press it, then it will directly launch into Google Lens. The LG is also IP68 water and dust resistant, and comes with support for wireless charging. Both the Moto G7 and the LG G7 have IPS displays. The Moto G7 has a 6.2-inch display, while the LG G7 is at 6.1 inches. The Moto is also at a 19:9 aspect ratio compared to 19.5:9 for the LG. The Moto tends to have deeper blacks than the LG, although the LG has a higher resolution of 1440p compared to 1080p on the Moto. The LG also has support for HDR, which the Motorola does not have. The LG G7 also has a feature called Brightness Boost, where the display can go beyond maximum brightness temporarily. This is what it looks like with that feature on. The LG G7 tends to take sharper pictures than the Moto G7, and a major factor in this is motion blur. The Moto G7 has no optical image stabilization, and it also tends to use longer shutter times due to the fact that it has a narrower aperture of f1.6 compared to f1.8. The LG G7 has a 16 megapixel camera, while the Moto G7 has a 12 megapixel camera. However, this will not make much of a difference when viewing them without zooming in, since the typical 4K display is only around 8 megapixels and this video is being exported in 4K. You will only really be able to tell the difference if you zoom in. However, the LG G7 does also have the capability of pixel binning, which can combine 4 pixels into 1 pixel, creating a 4 megapixel image, although it is brighter than the 12 megapixel image that comes out of the Moto G7. Both the Moto G7 and LG G7 come with secondary cameras, although the secondary camera on the Moto G7 is only a depth sensor, while the secondary camera on the LG G7 is a wide-angle camera. Here are the video capabilities on the LG G7 and Moto G7 compared. This is both at 4K 30 frames per second, although the LG is capable of 4K at 60 frames per second, and now the LG is recording in 4K at 60 frames per second. The audio is switching between the two phones, and the audio icon is on the one that we're using the audio from. Here is the stabilization compared, both at 4K 30 frames per second. Now the LG is at 4K at 60 frames per second, which should be a little less steady since it doesn't have the steady video recording enabled at 4K 60. And now they're both at 60 frames per second in 1080p. Now the LG is recording using the wide-angle camera. This is only possible using manual video on the LG G7. I will now compare the sound of the Moto G7 to the LG G7. In the background of the speed test, both have the speakers on the side, although the LG G7 has a feature where if it is placed on a table, then the speaker will be louder. It is called the boombox speaker. This will also be tested as opposed to just holding it in your hand. The Moto G7 comes with the Snapdragon 632, while the LG G7 comes with the Snapdragon 845. Both are octa-core processors, although the clock speed of the 632 is only 1.8 GHz compared to 2.8 GHz on the 845. Both have 4GB of RAM on the base 64GB storage option. The LG G7 also comes in a 128GB storage option with 6GB of RAM, although this will be at an additional cost. The LG G7 also has the Adreno 630, which is a better GPU than the Adreno 506 found in the Moto G7. In most of these areas, the LG G7 has an edge over the Moto G7, although one area where it does not is battery. Although the LG G7 comes with a more efficient 10nm processor compared to the 14nm processor found in the Moto G7, it is still a faster processor, and it also has a higher resolution than the Moto G7, which means that despite the fact that they both have 3000 mAh batteries, the Moto G7 is more efficient, and while I cannot test them due to issues with charge cycles, in terms of battery benchmarks, the Moto G7 generally does much better than the LG G7.
In terms of software, both of them come with Android 9, although there are differences between the skins. For example, Motorola comes with the app drawer enabled by default, whereas the LG does not. You can still enable the app drawer on the LG in settings, and you can turn on or off an app list icon. When enabled, the app drawer looks differently on the LG than it does on the Moto, going for a multi-page view instead of a scrolling view like on stock Android. The LG G7 comes with support for an always-on display. It's pretty dim by default. You can set it to be brighter, although this will come at the cost of battery life. While the Moto G7 does not have always-on display, it does have Moto display, which turns on the display if it senses you waving your hand above it, or if you move the phone. LG G7 has a built-in option to hide the notch called the new second screen. You can have it hidden with a black bar across the top of the display, or you can use one of these options. You can do the same thing in developer options on the Moto G7, although it will not put the status bar information in the black bar with the knots, like it does on the LG G7. LG also has an option to have this floating bar on the display, which is supposed to act as a replacement for the secondary display on the LG B10 and B20. The on-screen buttons on the LG G7 can be switched to a partially gesture-based navigation, where you still press the button to go home or press the back button to go back, although you can swipe up to go into multitasking or swipe to the right to switch apps. You can also swipe up and swipe across to navigate through the multitasking. The Moto G7 also comes with support for gesture navigation called One Button Nav. This still has pressing the button to go home, swiping up to go into multitasking, and swiping to the right to switch between apps, although you can also swipe to the left to go back. Motorola also has many other options listed in Moto Actions, such as double twist the phone to get into quick capture, double tapping to get into the flashlight, as well as touching the screen with 3 fingers to take a screenshot. Moto G7 also has the option to manually rotate the display if it senses that you turn it horizontally or vertically. Then a button will pop up to rotate it, although it will not do it automatically. Of course, you can still turn on Auto Rotate Screen in settings. In terms of software updates, neither Motorola nor LG have had a very good track record. Both are likely to get Android 10, although there is some question as to when. The LG G6 did not get it until over a year after it was released, and the Moto G6 only got it in June of this year. So Android 10 may not be coming anytime soon to the Moto G7 and LG G7. Also, support of Android 11 is unlikely on either of the phones, given Motorola and LG's track records.